Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. This meeting is being recorded live from beautiful downtown Summerland, and it's streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public are encouraged to register their name and civic address in advance of the meeting for the public comment opportunity found under items 8 and 15 by emailing corporateofficer@summerland.ca. Those who have not registered in advance but wish to provide public comments may call the District of Summerland conference line at 1-877-385-4099 and enter participation access code 7382948 during the live meeting. And on to the meeting. Any late items?
There are none.
There are none. So I can get approval of agenda. Councilor Van Elfen, second. Councilor Markwell, all in favor? Carried. And adoption of the minutes from September 28th. Councilor Van Elfen. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just have a question. And I understand that the mayor is still on council, but when she is on a leave of absence, is she considered absent from a meeting, or is she? Because on here it says she's members absent. I just wonder if she should be on there or not even on there.
She is absent from the meeting and still an elected official and still part of council, so.
Okay, question? So I think it's moved in second, so all in favor? Carried. No items under number 5 bylaw, public hearings, mayor's report, I don't have one. So I'll move on to 7, CAO's report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just one item tonight, and that's to announce that Brad Dollett is our new Director of Development Services with the District of Summerland. So fantastic to have you on board, Brad. Brad's first day is today, so get him straight into the hot seat in the council meeting. Brad's going to be is now responsible for leading the planning department, building department, development engineering function, business licenses, and our bylaw services departments. Brad's previously worked as general manager of development services with the regional district of Okanagan and Similkameen. Before that, as director of planning and community development with the town of Rocky Mountain House. His background and experience leading the delivery of outstanding customer service within the range of development services functions, experience in the economic development field, and contribution to previous downtown revitalization efforts are a great fit for our organization and certainly a huge welcome for our community. Brad and his family have been residents of Summerland for the last 3 years and are involved in many local organizations. And as I said, his first day is today. In Brad's former life as a consultant, he's been helping me with some of the planning priority projects which are on the agenda tonight. So if you like them, that'll be my responsibility. If you don't like them, that'll be Brad's fault. So, look forward to having those discussions with council, but got to know Brad a little bit over the last couple of months and I'm really looking forward to having him part of the team, leading the development services team, working closely with mayor and council over the coming years. Thank you, Your Worship, and welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Happy year.
All right, welcome, Brad. So we'll go straight to the public. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Last week or 2 weeks ago now, I guess, I had asked the CEO if we have a number for how much a by-election would cost. Do we have that number now?
No, I apologize. We will make sure we have that for the next time you ask the question.
Okay, so we'll move on to the public comment opportunity. Do we have anybody pre-registered?
We do not.
No. Is there anybody on the phone who would like to speak?
There is no one on the line.
No? Okay, so we'll move straight on to the development reports. 9.1, site-specific test amendment for 1661 Lodi. There he is. Are you gonna say that or are you gonna make, you should make Brad do it?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So, an application was received from the owner of 16618 Logie Road requesting a site-specific text amendment to the zoning bylaw to allow a single detached house as a principal use, as well as 2 principal dwelling units on their property. So this property is unique in that its OCP future land use designation is medium density residential, and it's zoned RMH, which is intended to accommodate manufactured housing communities. So because of this application is best understood by placing it within a historical context. The property was originally part of what is now the Samokin Mobile Home Park on Stewart Street, but was subdivided from the parent parcel in 1969. Despite its land use designations, the records from the file indicate that the property was never intended to be used as a mobile home park. So, and this is for a few different reasons. One being that the property was to be used by the owner of the mobile home park who planned on building either a single detached house or a mobile home, and based on the structures, it appears that they built both. And additionally, the size of the property isn't conducive to a manufactured housing community. So the concern at this time is that the only permitted principal use within the RMH zone is manufactured housing type 1 or 2. Although the single detached house is being used as a principal use, it's non-conforming. And with that, any alteration to that house, including accessory uses associated with it, would increase its non-conformity and must be brought into compliance. And this is particularly relevant for this application as the owner would like to build a garage. And as you can see on the slides, the garage is highlighted in red, and then as well as the driveway access. And the intent of this application beyond building a garage is twofold. So it's to bring the non-conforming single detached house into compliance through a site-specific text amendment to the zoning bylaw to make the existing house a principal use, and to permit 2 principal dwelling units on the property. As a part of this review process, staff considered several options that would bring this house into compliance, including an OCP amendment to the future land use designation and a zoning bylaw amendment to reflect the low density and residential use. However, there is not a zone or a land use that adequately addresses the needs of this property, and as such, staff are recommending a site-specific text amendment at this time. So through the referral process, staff noted that a pit and electrical meter must be installed at the owner's expense, and the Advisory Planning Commission at their meeting on September 25th supported the application, but noted that the single detached house noted that 2 single detached houses could be built in the future as a result of this amendment. Only under exceptional circumstances would staff recommend having 2 principal dwellings per lot. But given that both dwellings have existed for decades, staff see no harm in allowing this use to continue by bringing the single detached house into compliance in order to facilitate the construction of a garage. Should council not approve the site-specific amendments, the single detached house could continue as a non-conforming use, but no additions could take place that would further increase its conformity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, council? Or there's nobody on the line to speak? Councilor Pat.
Thank you, Worship. Question, if we go down this road, what is our site coverage going to be on this property?
Yeah, so as it is, their site coverage, it's 40% within the zone. So that means, given the size of the lot, it's around 860 meters squared. What they're proposing is around 600 meters squared. So they're still significantly under coverage.
And since there was 2 accesses to the property, was the deterrent not to subdivide based on the garage location?
No, that's not their intent at all. The owner originally came in just wanting to build a garage, and when I was speaking with her about that proposal, it came up that the house was a non-conforming use. And given the zone as well, it wouldn't be able to accommodate a subdivision because it's within the manufactured housing community.
Thank you. One more question, if I may. Was there ever a permit taken out?
So the records from the file, the house was built presumably in the 60s or 70s, but we don't have information on that because it's so old.
Thank you.
Councilor Barlow.
Yeah, it's, one of the things, points you had up there is that they're required to get an electrical meter. Is it not being metered now, or what?
Yeah, so we spoke with, through the referral process, it wasn't identified that the house had a meter. So through this, we would bring it into compliance and have it metered.
So it's had electrical service without an electrical meter all these years?
So I think just one of the houses, they'd still be, maybe Anthony spoke to this.
Through the chair, Your worship. So from our records, all the electrical use on the property has been measured, but through one meter, not two.
So there's a line between the two houses?
Correct. So it's planned in the future as part of this approval process to obviously separate those. And obviously now that we've had this brought to our attention through this process, the intention would be to meter those buildings separately. Again, fairly unique situation in that we have two single-family homes on a property with the current zone. So obviously trying to look at facilitating a better solution with this process as well.
I always said Summerland's full of unique situations.
Special. Councilor Vanel.
With motion on the table?
That's to, the amendment to be read the first and second time, and the public hearing to be held November 9th.
Correct. Thank you.
Seconder, please. Councilor Barlow. Any further discussion? Councilor Patton.
Thank you, Worship. Is there any measures that we can put into place prior to final that once they get approval, that they don't remove the mobile home or take the mobile home down and then construct a brand new second dwelling on that property, since we would say it's okay through the nonconformity or the approval of nonconformity?
Yeah, through the chair, Madam Mayor, if that's a concern of council, as Arian mentioned, there's nothing stopping them should council support the project or the proposal, including two new homes, for example. So council could provide a request that a covenant be registered on title, restricting the use to the mobile home unit on one, if that's a condition council would want to put forward either through direction tonight or after the public hearing.
Excellent, thank you so much.
So I'll call the question on this one. All in favor? That's carried. 9.2 OCP hazardous areas, Mr. CIO.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. This OCP amendment is brought forward to review the hazardous areas section of the OCP and also the neighbourhood planning process section within the official community plan. Currently, the wording within these sections of the bylaw provide a barrier to development in Summerland in certain areas, and to consider these amendments, in staff's opinion, will provide some flexibility for future development in Summerland. So the OCP, as it currently stands, as I said, restricts, prohibits any development on slopes within the district on lands having a natural grade of greater than 30%. These bylaw amendments were undertaken through a review process by staff with support from the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee and the Advisory Planning Commission. I'll speak to those in a bit more detail later in the report. Just to recap the existing policies, so you can see up on the screen the relevant sections that are being brought forward for amendment. The wording's quite strong and quite unique when we look at comparing this amongst other municipalities, where it refers to developing on lands greater than 30%. The first section there prohibits development. The second section speaks to any development shall not be permitted. And then there are some exemptions that exist there with regards to vegetation removal, driveway installation, those sort of things. And we're intending on keeping those with proposed amendments. And then with regards to the neighbourhood planning process, the wording that exists right now prohibits any consideration of that development on lands that have a 30% or greater natural grade. The intention of these policies is certainly to protect the visibility of slopes and ensure stability of land within the hillsides. They don't unfortunately take into account potential redevelopment opportunities that may be able to take place on areas with a slope of 30% or greater that could contribute positively to the district's future development plans. Based on your interpretation of the existing bylaw, this has restricted potential developments in the past and provided conflicting interpretation on a number of occasions. Based on the wording that exists, it's assumed that any slope greater than 30% is hazardous. From a geotechnical perspective, lands that contain a slope of 30% may or may not be a hazard. And without the ability to analyze this development as it currently stands cannot even be considered under the OCP without an amendment on a case-by-case basis. In looking to support future growth and development of housing in the community, staff are proposing some amendments to the OCP so that additional flexibility can be provided to allow for development under certain circumstances in areas that may be subject to the 30% or greater slope. And I've just got some images up on the screen that we included in the council package that give council and the community an overview of the topography within the entire district. You can see up on the screen the general slopes within the district. The areas in black are the grades that we're talking about, the bylaw with a 30% or greater. So you get an indication of where those areas are. And this is from our GIS mapping system that we're able to use and determine on an application by application basis. Some examples as we look through the district. These are just a couple of examples that we've highlighted. This is one of a portion of land that's located at the south end of the community. It's located outside of the growth boundary. And when you look at it from a slope analysis, you see there are some barriers with the black areas on the lands, which are greater than 30%. The areas are also subject to environmentally significant development permit area review and wildfire interface development permit review as well. So when we talk about looking at the amendments and bringing the amendments forward, there's still a robust review that needs to be undertaken if council is supportive of the amendments with the environmental and wildfire areas that currently exist. More, critical, are some of the infill areas that exist within the existing downtown or on the edge of downtown, on the edge of or within our existing growth areas. This is one site that's currently located with, a prohibition with 30% slope that's located on a chunk of land adjacent to existing low and medium density development that is zoned for residential development and has an OCP designation for residential development as well. So right now, under this scenario, this amendment would have to come through to council on a case-by-case basis should the development of these lands be considered. Got another single-family subdivision that was approved a number of years back on Jewel Crescent or Jewel Place. You can see there a single-family parcel hasn't been developed yet. Right now, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen at the lower end of the screen, there is an area for future development. It is does not have the grade restrictions. However, on this parcel, that's the location for the septic field. So when you look at that single-family parcel that was created, there's no ability to build a single-family home without coming to council and getting that OCP amendment dealt with. So as I said before, this rule is being complied somewhat inconsistently in the past. The intention now is to look at providing some flexibility within the bylaw.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
The houses on either side then, would they have gotten variances to build there?
I don't believe they did. So that's one of the things we're trying to clear up with this, to provide some additional wording within the bylaw that allows for that geotechnical assessment to be undertaken. You can see, and again, you can see on the right-hand side, you've got that single-family home. That single-family home is likely outside of the 30% area in this example. The lot that's highlighted in red is the one that I know staff had a number of questions on when looking at redeveloping that. Again, for a single-family home, the purpose of which the subdivision was developed to allow that use to occur. So that's just one example. We've got another example up on the screen, and I just highlighted these 3 or 4 examples. This shows a larger area adjacent to the highway. You've got a mix of agricultural and residential lands where you do have some of those slope areas. Again, should the property owner wish to look at redeveloping those lands under the proposed rules, they'd still need to be subject to the hazardous areas assessment and the environmental assessment. So the proposed amendments that we're bringing forward, again, provide some additional flexibility to what the current bylaw says. The design guidelines or guidelines that we've created for council's consideration look at requiring a geotechnical study for the assessment of development in these areas that are subject to 30% or greater. The provision of providing a site grading plan, looking at making sure that site is graded appropriately and doesn't unreasonably impact the adjacent properties. The intention here isn't to flatten the entire parcel. The intention is to accommodate a home or a residential building, making sure that flat yards aren't permitted, impacting the hillside. And then a visual assessment. Should anyone be willing to undertake a development in these areas, we require a visual assessment or impact assessment to be undertaken as well. The exemptions 11 to 1.3 here are the same as exist in the current bylaw. We felt it important to retain those. And then in the neighbourhood planning process, again, just trying to provide some wording that allows some flexibility for that conversation to happen on a more positive nature should a property owner come through the process and look at undertaking neighbourhood planning process. We reviewed these amendments, as I said, with the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee who supported them. No significant concerns. They recognise that for the most part, 30% grade or lands with 30% grade or higher are located within the high hazard or environmental or wildfire area. So there's again a robust review that's required on those. The recommendation from the committee was that the OCP amendment be supported. And then the Advisory Planning Commission, a really good discussion with the Planning Commission around this topic. A lot of discussion around the need for hillside development permit area guidelines, which we currently don't have in Summerland. And to an extent, the proposed bylaw provides some design parameters and guidelines around what can be considered appropriate for that. But certainly the hillside development permit area guidelines is something that perhaps through an OCP review in the future definitely need to be undertaken as we continue to get challenged with proposals in the hillsides. However, the Advisory Planning Commission saw the merit in bringing these amendments forward, especially with some of the provisions that have been put in place, and they recommended that they be supported. So staff recommendation on this item is to proceed with first and second reading and proceed to public hearing on November 9th. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councilor Bartholomew.
I certainly think this is a great idea to develop all those spots and stuff. But I wondered about the one statement there says flat yards are not permitted. And, I can kind of see the intention is that you don't want additional excessive leveling, grading, and cutting and stuff like that. But there could be lots of places where it makes sense to just build the house into the hillside. And then you're going to be left with a little bit of a lawn. Like how much flat yard are you not going to permit? Like what is everybody has a little bit or something, or maybe there could be a landing area. It seems kind of a arbitrary. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the intention of these is to not allow for one of a better word, moonscaping of the hillsides. I don't think we want to see that happen. So really, the intention is to try and contain the regrading in these areas. Again, the majority of these areas are going to be impossible to develop because of the slope in the soils and those sort of conditions. But this will provide some additional flexibility. There will have to be conversations through the subdivision process with staff and the applicant to ensure that you don't see that large flattening of portions of land. And I think the visual impact assessment requirement that we put in there will certainly, will endeavour to take care of a lot of those concerns.
So it's going to be a question of judgment.
Correct, and I think a lot of the design guidelines, again, these are somewhat design guidelines that staff are going to have to build or work with the development industry on these. But typically these type of guidelines should be dealt with as part of any larger rezoning, neighbourhood planning process or subdivision process. so that we're not dealing with them on a building permit basis. We really want to get them dealt with upfront early on in the process.
Councilor Van Elfen.
And if I'm not mistaken, some of the flatter areas that you're talking about will be necessary for septic to some areas.
You could have your lawn, it'll be green.
There you go.
Any other questions? Anybody want to bring a motion forward? Councilor Nelson,
Would you like me to read it?
well, or paraphrase?
We'll give first and second reading to the OCP Amendment Bylaw 2020-024, amending Section 11 hazardous areas and Section 14 neighborhood planning process in accordance with Attachment 1 to the report, and have a public hearing on November 9th, 2020.
Okay, second, Councilor Van Elfen. Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. 9.3, the zoning bylaw review, CAO.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. And Brad may need to help me a little bit on these. They get some questions from council, but I'll run through the proposed amendments that we're looking at bringing forward for council's consideration. These amendments have been identified over the last 6 to 8 months by staff, and I know a lot longer. Some of the amendments have been discussed around the council table with previous staff as well. So we're looking at consolidating a lot of the work that was brought forward in the past, in addition to the work the team has been identified or has identified over recent times. Really to look at streamlining our development processes on the planning end, improving interpretation of the bylaw, enhancing it for our customers and staff. As I said, our planning consultant has assisted us with a lot of this review over the last 6 months. The analysis was undertaken of the development variance permits issued by the district or reviewed by the district over the last couple of years as well. And we provided a package of that, or summary of that information in the council package. You can see the development variance permits make up the majority of planning applications that we see as a district over the last 4 to 5 years, significantly this year. The stats that we provided in the council report or as of April, but we've had a significant amount of variances. The analysis that was undertaken looked at trying to identify which sections of the bylaw would vary the most. When you look at the screen, principal building setbacks, front yard setbacks, retaining wall heights, accessory building setbacks were the majority of setback or development variance permits to the zoning bylaw submitted since 2017. So we took the information, the summary of the information that's in the council report, and it brought forward a number of key bylaw amendments, the majority of which, however, approximately 80% of all the amendments that we're bringing forward are administrative in nature. And very important to recognize that we really should be looking at updating the zoning bylaw every 3 to 6 months to make sure it's up to date, keep on top of all of these issues, as opposed to larger amendments that we're bringing forward. However, we've taken the opportunity to move those administrative changes forward, but look at some key changes based on the discussion we've had with council and the Development Process Improvement Committee, and more recently, the Planning Commission. The first amendment or larger amendment that we're bringing forward is with regards to retaining walls. You can see up on the screen highlighted in or in red is approximately the existing 1.2 meter height restriction that exists within the zoning bylaw. What's being proposed is an increase from 1.2 meters to 2 meters in height to provide some additional flexibility, but still retain the intent of that step back approach to developing retaining walls in the district. The second amendment, a larger amendment, speaks to the addition of craft brewery and distilleries into the downtown commercial zone, the CB1 zone. And up on the screen right now, or you can see the orange area, which is the downtown zone. Currently, we only have one brewery and distillery approved in downtown. That was on a site-specific basis for Breakaway Brewing. Council approved that a little while back. the intention would be, based on the economic benefit and the influx of these uses that we're seeing, to remove that rezoning requirement for this use in the downtown. We're obviously going through a downtown process over the next little while, and there may be other uses, but staff felt that this use was complementary to the direction downtown is heading, to provide some additional flexibility should these uses come forward in the future. The third component looks at addressing temporary use permits. So currently, temporary use permits are only permitted within our two agricultural zones and our commercial zone, and one site-specific amendment on Lakeshore Drive. Typically, temporary use permits are permitted in all zones, and that's what we're looking at bringing forward. Temporary use permits still have to come through to council. They're reviewed pretty much like a rezoning application. There's a public notification requirement, but really provide some additional flexibility for uses that council may want to consider or a property owner may want to consider on a temporary basis. Temporary use permits can be approved for a maximum of 3 years. They can then be renewed for another 3 years, but they can also be approved for a shorter time as council deemed that they be approved once they come forward for council's consideration. So we're looking at providing some additional flexibility on temporary use permit applications. And then one of the larger discussion pieces that was a key discussion through all the committees that we received some feedback on was with regards to the agricultural setback, and that's the existing 30-meter setback requirement in the agricultural zone. What's being proposed is a reduction in that setback requirement from 30 meters down to 15 meters, really recognizing the impact and somewhat limited width and a lot of smaller parcels of land that we do have in Summerland. Setting buildings back 30 meters from a property line can impact negatively the agricultural or farming operations of the property. So reducing it down to 15 meters provides some additional flexibility, but really trying to keep the integrity of those farming operations intact. One of the concerns we did hear from the Planning Commission and the Agricultural Commission or Committee was on agricultural lands that are adjacent to residential lands. And we've added a section in there really to respect where an agricultural property is located directly adjacent to a residential property, that 30-meter setback still be required. And should a property owner on those parcels wish to have a reduced setback, they'll have to consult the neighbor as part of the variance process. So again, through this section, we provide some flexibility, but recognize the intent of limiting the impact, especially in those agricultural and residential interface areas. As I said, there's a number of other administrative amendments that we've outlined in the report, and happy to answer some questions on those, looking at really updating a lot of the definitions and terms that we currently have, adding definitions into the bylaw that we have. We have a number of terms in the bylaw that are currently undefined, and a lot of questions on the staff side and development industry and residents side of things. We don't have clear definitions of what those uses are, so we're looking at clearing up that. Front property line changes, we're looking at adding an apartment housing use to the residential medium density zone that already allows duplexes and townhomes. The form of development envisioned in those zones certainly is able to accommodate apartment housing, so we're looking at adding that use there. We've updated some parking regulations and again, some administrative changes with regards to references of previous bylaw amendments. Development Process Improvement Committee had a lot of discussion on this going back to June and then again in September with these amendments, and recommending that the proposal be supported. The Advisory Planning Commission, as I said, had a lot of discussion around the retaining wall section, the agricultural setbacks, as I've said, and part of their key recommendation was with regards to that 30-meter setback, especially adjacent to residential zones. And then the Agricultural Advisory Committee, again, lots of discussion with that group. They're supportive of the amendments, but recommended that the proposed amendments be forwarded to the Ministry of Agriculture for their review, which we've included in the council report. A lot of their comments are generally positive around the amendments. However, I think both within the Agricultural Commission and the Development Process Improvement Committee, they recognize that obviously a larger review of the agricultural regulations is required. I know council have identified that through the agricultural plan that's developed in 2008, and we need to obviously just spend some time at some stage in the future looking at that and updating these. One of the interesting points, I think you've got a development committee that want to streamline the process. You've got an agricultural committee that recognize there needs to be some rules in place for certain reasons unique to Summerland. So one of the ideas that we've had discussed with both committees was getting both those committees together to really have a good discussion on the pros and cons of some of the agricultural regulations. But we've decided to move a lot of those larger changes to the future so that we can move forward with these smaller administrative amendments, especially given, as I said, we're well overdue for some of these more administrative changes. So the staff recommendation through that process is that got the old other recommendation up on the screen, but in the council report, you'll see that we're recommending that the zoning bylaw be supported, given first and second reading, and move forward to a public hearing on November 9th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm just wondering if we should do this and ask questions in order of the different amendments. So do like the retaining walls first, and then the craft breweries, and the temporary use permits, and then the agricultural zones. Does that work for everyone? So we're not jumping back and forth between different topics. Yeah. Okay. So questions regarding the retaining walls. Councilor Bartle.
Just so I can get it straight in my own head here. Under the current regulations, if a meter wall is going to be more than 1.2 meters, you have to get a variance permit?
Correct. So anything over 1.2 meters in height has to come through to council for a variance. You have to, and that's I guess, an increase over 1.2. You can still achieve a higher wall, but you have to step it back 1.2 as shown in the red.
So if it's over 1.2 meters, you have to get an engineering
Yes,
studies. And
yeah,
that part will still be the same. You'll still get an engineering study for a 2-meter wall, but it just doesn't require it coming to council for
Correct.
variance.
correct.
Yeah, Councilor Patton?
Thank you, Worship. The engineers and geoscientists have in their guidelines saying that any wall 3 meters in height, whether it be one continuous or offset, requires engineering. So that would be once on a 1.2 meter wall, once you hit your third wall, you'd require engineering on that at 1.2 meters. So I'm wondering with our changes, if there's going to be some reference to the 3 meters maximum height that does not require engineering at 1.2.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of that comes through the building permit stage. I think when the zoning bylaw considerations are made in front of council, you're typically dealing with the aesthetic impact of the retaining wall. But if there are new engineering requirements, and I think through the building permit stage, a lot of that can be dealt with.
Excellent, thank you.
I have a question regarding retaining walls then. So of the 14 retaining walls that required a variance in the past 3 years, how many of those were under 2 meters that wouldn't have required a variance in this?
Brad can maybe answer that and show the analysis for you.
I didn't look at quite the number of each individual approval, but if I'm, and I don't have those stats with me, but there was a significant amount that were just over 1.2 that had to come to council for decision.
So the majority, so there weren't that many over 2 meters.
Correct. And yeah, it's rare that you do have those larger retaining walls. I think we saw one on Aga Street in the industrial area with, I think, 2.3 meters, if I recall correctly.
Okay. So 2 meters, that's over 6 feet. I know that. And where, to me, a 6 foot concrete wall isn't necessarily the most attractive thing to look at, whereas 1.2 meters, that's 3 feet, I guess, that's not so bad. So I guess my concern would be is if it's 2 meters by default, will builders then just automatically build 1.82 meters if they don't necessarily have to go that high. And then my concern is the aesthetics, that we'll have all these really big walls all over the place. Maybe don't really need them.
I think one added incentive to the development community would be to get under that 1.2 meter mark in order to avoid having to get a building permit and to get engineering done, because that's going to be a significant expense. So that's still a requirement for the 1.2 meter mark is for a building permit and for engineering. So there will be still an incentive to try to step it back if they can to avoid having to get a building permit.
But if they have to get a building permit for being 1.5, then they might think, oh, well, we've got perhaps half a meter to play with. We can go even higher just to be safe. So, anything else regarding retaining walls? Moving on to craft brewery distilleries. That's great. Temporary use permits. Oh, sorry.
Back to retaining walls for a minute. I was just thinking about the previous item that we were dealing with regards to the 30%, right? If we, that passes, would we likely see more retaining walls in Summerland that are higher?
Yeah, through the chair, your worship, I think any redevelopment on anything greater than 20% is going to have some retaining function. Whether the intent of the guideline that we spoke to around not having large flat lots is to really look at making the building the retaining structure itself. So pushing the building as much, I guess, into that hillside if it's appropriate to do that, as opposed to having those large areas that the retaining wall would be visible or sort of separated from the building. So it likely will, but again, depending on the areas, every site will have to be assessed individually. We don't, as I said earlier, we don't have any hillside guidelines in our OCP in Summerland. Potentially in the future, hillside guidelines could speak to materials and exterior visibility of retaining walls. Our development permit guidelines don't deal with that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much what the CEO just mentioned, that if you look at the councils are worried about the aesthetics of retaining walls, the tool to utilize that is not the zoning bylaw, but rather DP guidelines. So that could be a future project to review the DP guidelines, the OCP.
Okay, thank you. Temporary use permits. Okay, well, I have one. Are temporary use permits carried, if a property is sold, are they carried over to the new owner or not?
They run with the property. They'll be registered on title similar to a development permit.
Okay, and so in the last 4 or 5 years, I remember a couple of temporary use permits that we issued, and I would say both were somewhat abused, and both were both continued after they expired. And both cases, we didn't know that they expired. We just slipped through the net or whatever. So my concern, if we're talking about expanding the use of temporary use permits when we don't even have control of them ourselves, it's a situation that's already been hasn't been working well, and we're kind of, I think we need to fix that before we expand the use of them. If that makes sense.
Not certainly. I know there's a couple of examples where the temporary use permits have expired and have not been renewed, and the use has continued. So there's it's obviously incumbent upon staff to be on top of the expiry dates and the renewal processes that are required on those temporary use permits. And again, through any approval process that comes to council with a temporary use permit, council can apply any number of conditions, depending on the use as well, to restrict it, to limit the time of it as well. So I think obviously a more concentrated effort on the things is needed to provide some better oversight in the future.
I guess my question is, how are we gonna stay on top of it? You know, we heard this afternoon about state of our IT systems, and it's probably, you know, something should just come up, but I don't think we have that thing that comes up. So it's how do we stay on top of it, is the question.
No, for sure. And I think our record keeping systems obviously need some work. The IT department is starting that process now. We've got an enforcement process that's certainly going to be a little more proactive, perhaps in the future on some of these things. So I think you'll see a lot more concentrated effort. One of the organizational changes with Brad coming on is the move from bylaw into development services. So I think there's communication, lines of communication between the building department, planning department, and bylaw will certainly be enhanced with all the work that Karen's done recently and Brad will be doing in the future.
Councilor Martin.
Yeah, I have exactly the same concern, but I took comfort in the presentation we have this afternoon of new systems and such in our bylaw enforcement. And I have to, the only thing we can do is see what happens. And, you know, it's up to council, because we were all aware of these things to ensure that things are carried through.
Councilor.
I appreciate that it's up to council, but next time there could be a brand new council, so if it's a 3-year temporary use permit, it's up to staff to inform council that, or staff to inform the person with the temporary use permit that it's expiring and they're gonna have to renew. Because it could be a whole new group of people here that aren't aware of the temporary use permits that are out there. Just a thought.
Councilor Carlson.
Yeah, just a note on the one campground, which is one of the items that we're talking about here. It's actually on the agenda for the Ag Advisory Committee on Friday. And the owners of this campground are proposing a permanent permit, zoning bylaw change. And so that's something, I guess, to just put on your radar, since they were in contravention of their temporary use permit and are now asking for something that is different than that moving forward. And so a temporary use permit has its uses, but it also perhaps is a stepping stone for some people to try something out and then ask for a permanent version of what the temporary use was sort of a trial for.
Which I believe is the thinking in the RUS with short-term rentals. I wanted to ask Brad, how, with your experience from the RUS, how the use of temporary use permits for regulating short-term vacation rentals, did you find that as an effective way to do it, or?
Yeah, I think it is, especially looking at it from the regional district lens, is because they can't issue business licenses. So they don't have another regulatory tool to use for the temporary use, other than a temporary use permit. So I think it works fairly well. And mind you, they have a fairly robust system of tracking their TUPs when they come up for expiry. That would be something I would be hoping to implement in the near future, and not just with TUPs, but with other expiring things, such as landscaping security would be another example. After it's a period of time for maintenance, as undergone a time when we were required to do an inspection and release that landscaping security. So those are things I hope to implement as a director of this department.
Anything else? No. Moving on to the agricultural zones setback. Councilor Van.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to see this agricultural zone setbacks. It's been a problem for years, a 30-meter setback. We have a lot of smaller, narrow acreages, and next thing you know, you're plunking a building in the best part of your farm. The 30-meter setback up against residential. If I'm an owner of that property and I come to the planning department or the council and prove to you that I'm using that building for housing equipment and non-livestock, is that, you know what I mean? Like, I understand the 30-meter once upon a time, but, you know, it was, you know, if you're not housing livestock 15 meters from residential, I'm parking tractors and orchard equipment for say in it. How's that harming my residential neighbors? So that's just the concern I have.
Councilor Carlson.
I have a question about greenhouses. If somebody, for example, wanted to put a personal gardening greenhouse in their backyard and it was part of the farm home plate, would it still be considered a greenhouse? If it didn't require a building permit, it was less than 108 square feet or whatever, would that still be subject then to either 15 or the 30, depending on how many urban neighbors they have, if it's all part of a private garden? To me, it reads as yes, it would. And I just wonder if that's one of those bigger questions for the next set of bylaws, I guess, or if there's a way to clarify that.
Well, I think that, you know, you could interpret it that way, to be honest, like, depending on, I can't remember offhand what the definition of greenhouse is currently. But there is separate setback requirements for within the farm home plate, including accessory buildings. So, you know, you could interpret it as an accessory building to the residential use within the farm home plate, and therefore, you know, subject to those setback requirements.
Okay, I asked because I feel like there's probably quite a few of existing, perhaps greenhouses that are just for backyard use that maybe they would then trigger a variance request if it was as a lot of agricultural parcels, right? So just something to keep in mind, I guess.
Any other questions, comments? Councilor Pat?
Thank you, Worship. I did notice on the Agriculture Advisory Committee, there was some concerns raised in regards to the lighting and other nuisances when we're dealing with groves. And I noticed that we haven't spoken at all in regards to that. And I was just wondering if there was anything in the works. It's a very valid point that they brought up. And I was just wondering if there was, in the future, if we're going to be looking at some sort of regulation in the light pollution, especially if they're, you know, within 30 meters of a residential area, that can be quite obtrusive. The lighting that they do shed. So no, I thought I would bring that up on behalf of the phone calls that I've received in regards to that one point. So
Yeah, I think some larger discussion needs to be had around those larger greenhouse facilities and cannabis production. I know it's a relatively new permitted use in agricultural areas, so odors and those sort of things. I know we've had some direction in the past from council to look at odor mitigation and those sort of things, which I think is, and Brad may have some experience at the regional district with more of these than we have right now, but I think definitely will be tested out on the first ones that have existed in Summerland or will be coming forward, and definitely want to be ready if they do expand. Brad, I don't know if there's anything else from your perspective on those.
I think the following those comments, the addition of the 30 medium meters, setback to residential areas as well. Like those uses will be restricted to be outside that 30 meter mark, right? So, but if it's not next to a residential area, then, you know, I think it should be sufficient to go down 15 meters. It shouldn't be as big of a nuisance impact on another farm, as an example, right? So. Councilor Coffey.
I'm just wondering how wide, like it makes me think. So we have an orchard, and beside us there's all the greenhouses, but on the other side of the orchard there's residential. So if I chop down my orchard, it's probably 30 meters, and then there's all these greenhouses. So it's not 15 meters or 30 meters. It's not going to matter. It's what's in between that's really going to affect
the residential units next door. So I don't really think that I mean, I get it, maybe it won't be glowing in your quite as brightly, but you're still gonna have that same impact.
Councilor Park?
Yeah, along those same lines, I wondered, are there solutions other than just space? Because I mean, people that set up, I don't even know the name of the area, but a lot of people see the greenhouses from four rooms and, you know, it's acres and it's bright and there could be,
Oh, sorry, and there could be, you know, something quite large that, doesn't matter, with 15 or 30, it comes to cars and says, can we require shading or special lights that focus downward, things like that?
I believe in zoning bylaw, there is landscaping buffer section that has green in the area. We might have more info on that as to whether it's required right now for agricultural uses or.
Yeah, so for properties that abut agricultural land, mostly residential, I think the requirement is for them to have a 4.6 meter landscape buffer. Not so for the residential properties, but not the agricultural.
But apart from that, like if you did a new subdivision right now next to agricultural land, you'd have to put in that buffer. But if somebody was to take a piece of agricultural land and put in some greenhouses right now, where there is no buffer, or is there anything that we can put in our bylaws to say that requires shading and not to have overhead street lamps that, you know, shine the whole countryside up like a ball diamond? Really, I mean, it does. And if there's something, if there's an alternative, still convince them to do what they want to do, I'd sure like to see it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's, do have some interface areas on Julia Street, for example. We've got a pretty intensive farm operation, significant lighting right next to some residential areas. And before the landscaping, or while the landscaping was there, not so much of an issue. Once the landscaping gone, it's a significant issue. So I think part of the work that I know we want to do around the comparison with the ALC regulations and district regulations will, I think, highlight some of these issues where we can perhaps become more restrictive or not based on council's direction or the committee's review. But certainly something in the future that we definitely want to investigate.
Councilor Trainer?
I apologize if this has already been asked, but under the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee, one of their bullet points is cannabis production should remain with the 30 meters setback. Do we know why that is? Was that because of the odor, or, and is that going to apply to them or no? Are they just, they would still put the 15?
That was one of the comments made from I believe one of the members on the Development Process Improvement Advisory Committee. Really the concern was around the odor and I guess the unknowns around those uses. However, the proposal is to have those facilities at a 15-meter setback.
It's 15, okay.
So, correct.
So we're not
That's
worried?
That was considered. Again, we had a lot of discussions with the other committees, and in the staff review and I guess consolidation of all the issues, we brought forward the 15-meter setback.
Okay,
But again, subject to council direction on that.
great, okay, thank you.
Councilor Van Elf?
But back to the lighting issue for say, you know, is it an approved use on ALR land? That's the bottom line. It's up to the ALC. If the ALC says, yes, you can have grow lights, you know, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so be it. That's what the ALC is allowing on that land, and I don't think we have a lot to say in it, you know?
Councilor Patton?
I would like to ask a question in regards to the temporary farm worker housing, but it wasn't in our list. So since we're on agriculture, can I bring it up now?
Sure, the Ministry of Agriculture brought it up, so let's see.
Thank you. My question was, we talked about this in the development committee, was for temporary farm worker accommodations, and this is B, letter B, where it talks that a building designed specifically for seasonal farm workers to live in for short periods of time during the harvest season buildings constructed for this use must contain sleeping facilities and may contain washroom facilities, but may not contain cooking facilities. And I'm just wondering, and I believe we asked this question too in committee, is why are we imposing the no cooking facilities in temporary farm workers accommodations?
Yeah, through Chair. I think from what I understand, this exists in our current bylaws, so there wasn't any intention to have that, I guess, more fulsome discussion at this stage with the administrative amendments, but again, happy to have that discussion with council. I think as we bring forward the comparison between the ALC regs and the district zoning bylaw regulations, you'll see where some of those conflicts may exist, and it exists now for some reason, and obviously some history perhaps that council may be aware of before staff as to why that requirement is in place. But certainly something that definitely needs to be reviewed from a consistency point of view, because it is a concern that we've heard from a lot of farmers.
I think the Ministry of Agriculture's letter that's in our package is a pretty good little list of things that we need to review and look into. It's quite handy for us to, but I think this is just dealing with setbacks from this. Councillor Daniel?
No, I just want to, comment on Councillor Patton's remarks, because I do recall that conversation at our planning commission meeting, and it's kind of puzzling to say the least. And it's definitely a conversation that we need to have as soon as possible. With the temporary farm workers accommodations, cooking facilities. I mean, now you're almost looking at 2 buildings. A housing and a washroom facility, and then / another building for cooking. I know what the intent was. We all know what the intent was. Is to make sure that these buildings aren't rental units, in the future. That's up to bylaw. But in the meantime, we should treat our workers, with the same, that I would treat a family member if I was housing them. At least let them have a kitchen that they can cook in. So I think it's a conversation we need to have soon.
Yeah, and just to add one piece to it, I think that when this was originally discussed and debated and put into an ag plan and into a bylaw, a temporary farm worker in the Okanagan didn't mean a seasonal agricultural worker. It meant someone who, sort of from abroad. It meant someone who was coming here from other parts of Canada, more likely. And so now there's a lot more regulation around housing for temporary farm workers, especially for the seasonal programs. And so it no longer fits when you look at it with the new federal regulations, provincial regulations, that maybe weren't what the priority was when this was originally, and the original intention was there. So I think Councillor Van Alphen is right. It was to try and avoid having a whole bunch of rental accommodation, because 3 bedrooms with a bathroom and kitchen facility is quite ideal on a regular acreage. They're all over town. We call them picker shacks, even though no pickers ever lived in them. And so it was determined that putting cooking facilities either outside or in a different space would be less of a draw for someone who was going to rent that facility. But we're not talking about necessarily building these facilities for temporary Canadians or temporary backpackers. It's now for temporary workers who are here on pretty strict visas. So that's all I can say.
I think those changes will be coming in due course, I guess. Councillor Van Alphen.
If I'm not mistaken, Councillor Carlson can set this straight. These foreign workers that we're getting today, a lot of them are here for a much longer period of time than our seasonal workers once were.
Absolutely, up to 8 months, which isn't just a harvest. But see, there's lots of things in there that do need to be changed. And I know it came forward at one point and it went back, so I look forward to talking about it again.
Okay, just bring it back to the report at hand here. Does anybody else have any questions in general regarding what's being recommended? Councillor Martin.
Yeah, if I could go back to the light issue. Is it Could we have a bit more information on what is possible to put in our regulations since we're looking at those? Councillor Van Alpen is right, sort of that if the Farm Industry Review Board, the Right to Farm Act says that this is a normal farm practice, and you know, there's nothing we can do.
That's right.
But they might not have that definition. They might say, you know, this is an easy mitigating measure to have shades or something like that. So I'd like to find out.
So in the meantime, are we happy with what's being presented here? Do we want to take this to public hearing, or do we want to? Good with that. So someone wants to bring a motion forward.
Through Chair, Your Worship, just want to put up on the screen the revised recommendation. In the council report, we didn't reference first and second reading, and we referenced attachment 2. So up on the screen, you'll see the correct recommendation from staff with regards to providing first and second reading for the zoning amendments in accordance with attachment 4, and that we were scheduling a public hearing on November 9th.
I'll move that.
Okay, second. Any discussion? No? Okay, all in favor? That's carried. 9.4, development application procedures bylaw, no CP amendments. Mr. Cito.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. These amendments are being brought forward to the existing land use procedure bylaw. The proposal is to create a new development application procedures bylaw, and there are also some OCP amendments that are required depending on the direction of council as well. So the existing land use procedure bylaw was developed in 1998. It's been out of date for a while, and is required to be updated with regards to delivery of service, streamlining application processes within development services, specific to the planning department. The proposed bylaw addresses all of the application types dealt with by the planning department. Building permits aren't relevant to this piece of legislation. They would come under a building bylaw, which we'll be looking at sometime in the future. The draft bylaw was presented to council in mid-2019. However, a number of issues were identified, including the need for additional consultation to occur. The bylaw that was brought forward was significant in size, and there was certainly recognition around the council table, I believe, at the time, and also through our review at the committee table to create a bylaw that is scaled appropriately for the development needs in Summerland, relevant to the type of applications that we deal with. The proposed bylaw, or the bylaw that was presented to council in 2019 was presented to the development committee in June of 2020. We presented that to them really to give them an understanding of what the potential bylaw could look like. We got a lot of direction from them, which was included in the staff report. I won't repeat, but what you see coming through the development process improvement advisory committee relevant to this bylaw is resulted in the bylaw that's being brought forward for council's consideration as well. And again, thanks to Brad for his help as we wrangled all the comments that came in through the consultation process with the committee into the bylaw that's being proposed to council today. So the scope of the bylaw that's being presented deals with, as I said, all the planning department applications, OCP amendments, zoning amendments, development permits, development variance permits, temporary use permits, ALR, the variety of ALR applications, and also cannabis license applications, which is a new piece to the system over the last couple of years. The bylaw speaks to the process in which those applications are proposed. One of the key changes being brought forward through this bylaw is and the key part of the discussion that we've had with the committee is around the delegation of authority. Currently, all development permit applications come to council for review and approval, except for watercourse development permits. The authority to delegate those is actually within the official community plan. High hazard, environmentally sensitive, wildfire hazard, all currently come to council when they're submitted. What's being proposed as part of this bylaw is the delegation of the high hazard, environmentally sensitive watercourse and wildfire hazard development permit applications to staff, recognizing that there are strict guidelines within the OCP that need to be met. And regardless of who is approving these types of applications, the guidelines need to be met. If, and similar to the other development permit applications, if staff are not supportive of an application of this type, they would have to come to council for a decision. In terms of process improvement, which is one of the key areas of focus for review of this bylaw, the delegation of authority would streamline the process for these type of applications by approximately 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the application that is being proposed. With regards to the form and character development permit guidelines, currently all the development permit area form and character development permits come to council for approval. What's being proposed is to streamline a portion of these, recognizing that these developments can be significant and have a significant impact on the community. What's being proposed is for smaller forms of development in these development permit areas to come to staff for review. And that includes commercial signage, exterior signage, additions to buildings where floor areas of the addition is less than 100 square meters, amendments to existing development permits where form and character did not substantially alter the original approval, facade alterations to existing buildings to up to $150,000, construction of multifamily residential buildings in multifamily, downtown and lower town development permit areas up to a maximum of 3 stories in height, construction of buildings in downtown and lower town areas to a maximum of 3 stories and a maximum floor area of 1,500 square meters. Construction of buildings in the Bentley Road industrial area, less than 1,000 square meters, and surface parking lots. So these smaller forms of development still need to comply with the design guidelines that are currently within the OCP and would be delegated to staff. Anything in addition to what you see up on the screen would come forward to council for review and compliance with the development permit guidelines. One of the other key
Yep, if you're ready
Sure.
for questions.
Just because it was pretty.
Yeah, go for it,
clear,
go for it.
One of the things I remember, maybe it's twice, we had to came to council, Bentley Road Development Permit Area, the landscaping was more than $50,000. If the 1,000 square meter parking area stuff and those changes, does that get rid of that? Because I didn't see why landscaping had to, the industrial area had to come to council.
Yeah. And typically, the intention here is to have, I guess, streamline the process for those industrial developments. It's somewhat rare that you see an industrial area in a development permit area. That's a sort of bigger discussion I think council may want to have in the future. But the landscape guidelines would be undertaken, I guess, as part of these smaller developments. Anything 1,001 square meters would have to come to council, and the compliance with the guidelines would still have to be
What
there.
about that dollar limit? What if it was 900 square meters and $51,000? Would it then have to come to council?
I don't have the landscape guidelines with me right now, but as it stands right now, there's no change being proposed to that landscape section within the.
See, I think the dollar figure should be addressed.
No, that's something we can certainly look at.
So the dollar amount, just to clarify, is going up from 50,000 to 150,000.
So that was for everything and
Everything.
Yeah, that was my question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The another part of the bylaw that we're looking at changing, again, we've had some discussion with council around the public notification consultation area. The current requirement is 30 meters in terms of notification area from properties. That's being proposed to be doubled, increased to 60 meters, allowing a wider area around the property to be notified as part of an application. And again, similar to what council have done in the past, on an application by application basis, council can increase that based on the application that's being brought forward, but we're looking at increasing that through this bylaw change. And then really looking at making it clear for the public and staff and the development industry around creating that table that really clearly shows the notification requirement. One of the new, I guess, initiatives written into this bylaw is the developer initiated or developer-directed public information meeting, and that is really applicable to your larger OCP amendments and zoning amendments. Typically, it's required through the public process and public hearing process, but as part of the procedure bylaw, those conversations early in the process are certainly valuable to the community before the application actually comes through the process. So we're looking at putting in place some requirements around that. Development permits, there's no public notification requirement for any development permits that do not have a variance. So form of character guideline or development permits have to comply with the guidelines, but there are no requirements for any public notification, regardless of if it come to council or not, other than being on the public agenda. We are intending on having the approvals up on our development permit, our website, so the community have access to those approvals. Variances still come through a public process as they do right now, so too with temporary use permits and temporary use permit renewals. Contained within the original bylaw, if council recall, were approximately 25 or so pages of procedures and requirements for development applications. One of the things that Brad pointed out through the process was the meatiness of this bylaw and the unnecessarily overburdening the development community with a 50-page document that's really not providing too much assistance as a bylaw. We need some flexibility within these procedures and checklists and applications. Putting them into a bylaw, if we had to change a checklist, technically we'd have to come to council and have that changed. So we've stripped down the bylaw to the actual bylaw itself, which highlights the process and procedure for each of the application types. The checklists and timelines and estimates and those sort of things are taken out, and we're in the process of putting them into application forms on an application by application basis with each of those packages. We reviewed the proposed bylaw with the development committee. One of the things that they pointed out was with regards to the downtown Trout Creek and the multifamily areas with regards to the 3-story height limit or delegation of authority. One of the questions was with the scale of those types of developments, and what we've put in place is a maximum floor area of 1,500 square meters in addition to the 3 meters, which provides a bit more clarity to staff and the development industry, and anything over 1,500 square meters or 3 stories in height would have to come to council for review. One of the other points within the bylaw was around requiring or ensuring staff had the appropriate rationale when requesting a technical study. And we've adjusted the bylaw to reference the need for that to occur. The development committee recommended support for this bylaw. As I said earlier, depending on council's appetite for delegation, that will trigger OCP amendments. What's currently proposed is reflective of the delegation of authority that is being proposed in the bylaw. We'll need to amend the OCP to reflect that should council support the bylaw. And the staff recommendation is to give the first and second reading to the procedure bylaw, the OCP amendments, and direct staff to hold a public hearing on November 9th. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councilor Pat.
Thank you, Worship. I want to say thank you for doing this. The first version that came across to us a while back really scared me with the amount of regulation and red tape that was put into the document. Like, to me, it would have added thousands of dollars onto a developer that wanted to build in Summerland. So I thank you for doing this. One thing that I did like to see was in regards to development permits was including the environmentally sensitive areas to have some judgment by the development officer to actually work with our development community because, as we all know, the environmentally sensitive areas is Summerland. And I don't think there was one piece of property in Summerland that didn't have to go through some sort of environmentally sensitive research or report that had to go through. So in reading this, I thank you because it was a breath of fresh air considering what it was. So thank you so much.
Councilor Barco.
Yeah, I think that Brad has certainly had a busy first day of work.
I got this all done today.
Good job.
Good luck tomorrow.
Yeah. That's right. Great expectation.
Take the rest of the evening off. I was just wondering, you took a lot of the process stuff out of the bylaw, which is great, because sometimes you have to change things and stuff. And I was thinking in provincial and federal legislation, they always have the act, which is our bylaw, and then regulation, and regulation can be changed by some person who has the delegated authority, the governor general or whatever. So I wonder if we shouldn't formalize that and say all these other things will be, set by the Director of Development Services, and maybe just, formalize how it's gonna work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think through policy, under the direction of CEO or Director of Development Services, we've got bulletins that are created through the department for a variety of different things that the department does. So I think there's, I would have liked to bring all those forward, but we had, 2 or 3 page packages on the 15 different types of applications that were going to come forward. But I think it's an opportunity for Brad in the future to bring that forward to council so you can really see some of the improvements that are going to happen on that application side of things.
I really appreciate that we're not doing this all in one go. This was enough.
Anything else? I just want to comment, I guess, or ask a question too. It's one of the, I understand, I appreciate the work being done to streamline the process. But one of the advantages of some of these things coming to council, such as environmental sensitive permits and form and character, is that it made the public aware that these issues are out there. And it made us, council, aware. And I think it's fine and dandy to say, well, we'll post all this on the website. But as again, we heard this afternoon, I'm not entirely confident that's going to happen anytime soon. So I'm a bit concerned that we'll race ahead, improving our processes, streamlining our processes, but the transparency aspect is going to fall behind. And so I guess what assurance do we have to make sure that it doesn't?
Yeah, I can speak to that first. I know Arian's been great at the monthly reports that come out of development services. Perhaps through that process, we're able to outline all of the various staff approvals that have been undertaken for the development permits delegated to staff. That's one means. Certainly a better presence on our website is required and can be undertaken. And I'm sure there's lots of other ideas, but really I think what we sort of get down to is council comfortable delegating these types of applications to staff? As I said, they have to be reviewed against the same design guideline, whether they come to council or whether they come to staff. It's just, is council comfortable with the level of authority that's being proposed or not? And that's certainly a discussion that council need to provide some direction on.
Yeah, I guess, for me, my comfort level is directly correlated to the transparency of these, permits being made public. So, but Councillor Van Helfen.
Am I not mistaken, CEO, that you said it could cut 4 to 6 weeks off building permit time?
On the development permit side of things, the detailed analysis around staff report and depending on the council agenda timeline, they're the 2 sort of key things that you'll see reduced. There's still a need for a staff report. We need to have a rationale attached to a development permit, but not to the level of detail that we obviously would have through a council meeting process.
And that's why, to delegate this authority to staff, and I understand Mayor Holmes is concerned about, the environment and so on, and environmentally hazardous or, hazardous stuff and, all those things. But it's the biggest complaint we hear, especially on the development committee and in the building community is, the timelines to get permits approved. I want to build a 2-car garage in my house and it's taking me 3 months, 6 months. sorry, I'm exaggerating possibly, but, that's what we keep hearing in town over and over again. So delegating authority that can speed up the process, 4 to 6 weeks time saving is massive. So, I'm in favor of it.
I know I understand what Mayor Holmes is saying, but I also take comfort in that something like the geotechnical report, I don't think we would have a whole lot to say about that. We might have something to say about the environmental assessment reports, but once again, I kind of like to hope to rely on the science rather than council's opinion. But, that being said, you can always get two environmental assessors having two very different opinions, so I'm not so sure about that one. We'll have to see where it is. Oh, I know where. So behind this is the question, and I hate to ask this question because I think we should do what's right for Summerland, not other communities, but are we aware, or do you know off the top of your head, let's say Penticton and Beachland and Kelowna do environmental assessments and geotechnical reports come to council in those communities?
In Penticton, they go through, they're delegated to staff. If there's an assessment done as part of an area structure plan or a rezoning, then that will come to council as part of the whole package. But on a site-by-site basis, they'll come through the staff level on the most part, RWS, right?
Yeah, same thing. They're delegated for the most part.
Thanks.
Yeah, my point is not that council's opinions on technical matters are really, are going to sway it. My point is that in the past, it's been the only way that these things have been made public. And so we have to ensure that isn't lost by it not coming to council, not coming to the public forum. Council.
Yeah, just follow up on that. I agree with what you're saying. I think we need to recognize that there may be a member of the public who has also an environmental background, or perhaps they are scientists and they have a different opinion than what maybe was presented. And there needs to be at least some way that they are able to give input. If, for example, they know that there's a rattlesnake habitat that's going to be disrupted by this and it's not in that environmental report, how and where does that get to be publicly presented, or that input be sought? And I think that's maybe an example of what you are going for, and I see a challenge there as well.
Just a comment with regards to both your concerns. We have to keep in mind that these are just development permits. They're not variances that are subject to discretionary approval. So councils in the past have, and regional boards have been, filed under lawsuit by not following their own guidelines, depending on receiving public comment. So sometimes public comment, although you try to think that it's always more positive, but it can lead to problems where you're not following what's stated in the OCP and opening up yourselves to challenges. So a key kind of point of this too is to ensure that there's consistency in the interpretation of the guidelines that are within the OCP for each of these DPs. So that's another benefit of going through this process. And I understand the need for enhanced public notification, but notification is not the same thing as allowing public input into the development process, which a rezoning or an OCP amendment, that's allowable and encouraged, but not with the development permit process.
I understand. I think mainly it's about, people want to know what's going on. We, council, want to know what's going on. So it's about making sure people know what's going on.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out as well, we do have a shared environmental planner with regional district, City of Penticton. So there is the extra oversight on the environmental side of things that's been established, I think, for a number of years here in Summerland. So in terms of the oversight and public interest, I guess compliance with our guidelines, we have our staff, but we also have the additional resource to assist us with that on a case-by-case basis.
Any other questions? Councillor Patton?
Thank you, Worship. This is going back to Councillor Van Elpen was talking about the time savings of 4 or 6 weeks where it doesn't have to go through the process to come to council. My question is, will we be looking at, I don't want to call it a policy, but a procedure where the contractor developer can submit a BP application to run concurrent with the DP process that's going through, that's going to be reviewed by staff? As long as they know that it's not a guarantee, but it could shave a lot of time off of the application process where they don't have to wait for the decision and then submit the application, but it can run concurrent. Just putting it out there for a few.
Yeah, no, certainly we are undertaking that right now where there's, for example, up at Hunters Hill, we have the subdivision still in process. It was not registered, but we accepted the building permits in advance so we could review them, and they weren't allowed to be picked up until subdivision's registered, but at least that 3-week process had been undertaken and the developer didn't lose any time. And same with development permits. The risk is on the developer. If council or staff say no, then they've spent a lot of money on building permit plans. So we already allow that in certain circumstances, but something we can maybe more from a formal procedure side of things put in place if that's something that the department thinks is appropriate.
Just a FYI, in response to that request, RDOS has a policy that for all delegated permits, we can accept building permit at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And if there's no other questions, if somebody wants to bring a motion forward. Councillor Patton? That one up on the board?
Yes, as written.
Okay. Councillor Markwell, any discussion? Oh,
Sorry, I just want to point out, Your Worship, the last point there, the bylaw obviously won't be rescinded until council adopt the new one, if they adopt the new one.
okay. So no, that goes to public hearing. On the 9th as well. On the 9th. Okay, any discussion?
Is our CAO here?
My last name.
That's his last meeting.
That's his last
Time.
All right, Councillor Kern.
We have a pretty busy public hearing night, I think, on the November the 9th. All of the public hearings will be posted on the website for people to see. Okay, just so they can keep track if they're interested in commenting on any of these, they'll all be there for them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm glad I'm not having there. Okay, no discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried. No bylaws for adoption. Business arising from a committee of whole and closed sessions. Anything? Don't think so. No. Any notice of motions? No notice of motions. Information items. Anybody wish to bring anything forward? No? So if I can have a motion to receive those for information. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Barnwell, all in favor? That's carried. Committee, commission meetings, minutes. Anybody want to bring any of those forward? No. Motion to receive. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Patton, all in favor? Carried. Councillor reports. Councillor Barnwell, you.
Just looking at my calendar, I don't think I have anything that I can report on.
Okay, Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Worship. I want to thank you for taking over for me for the month of October. It got me out of the grapevine, so I thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
And I have nothing else to report.
Councillor Kenner.
I have nothing tonight.
Okay, I have nothing. Councillor
Nothing
Carlson.
tonight.
Councillor Donaldson. I know. So I need a motion, oh no, it's the public media comment period. Do we have anybody on the line?
There's no one on the line.
No, I'm watching something else. So motion to adjourn. Alfred, Bartholomew, all in favor? That's carried. 7:35.